living our lives, and we're all interested in contentment. And if we have ways to find contentment through the daily practice of whatever it is we might be doing, we'll be happy. And a lot of the perceived difficulties these days are because many of us feel some unease about our relationship with things ecological and things social and things economic. And that if we all can work on simple ways to find contentment and happiness, that's a big start. Because when each one of us dies, if we can look back on lots of moments where we are really fully living and enjoying, then that will be probably the best we can have. And that's not a statement that means to turn our back on things going on in the world that we don't like or that disturb us, because in order to be sustainable, we have to follow Dan Kemmis's ideas about bioregionalism and find ways to learn from the weather of the day or the weather of next week and the way the water is here and the way the grizzly bears are here and the way that you get from here to Four Corners on a big highway. So we have to work with those aspects of our lives. If we simply focus on just being happy and turn ourselves inward, then we probably won't find that happiness anyhow. Most of us take joy in connecting as part of a community and working together on things that are of joint mutual interest and satisfaction. So I think my feeling is that it's much better, more fun, more fulfilling to be engaged than to simply turn your back on some of the issues and problems that we have. With that in mind, we started a program called Bioregions in 1998, and a lot of this was through the thinking and impetus of a person who, when Dan Kemmis was mayor of Missoula, Tim Swanson was mayor of Bozeman. And Tim helped my thinking about the idea that people learning to live in a place would be really important. He had just come from being mayor of Bozeman and having a chance to get together with mayors from the whole greater Yellowstone and discovering that there was some common thought and values going on, and that the mayor of Bozeman did have something in common with the mayor of Cody. That was sort of a new idea, that the mayors and the government people within the greater Yellowstone have something in common, even though the political boundaries are very much separate. So from the idea of thinking bioregionally and acting bioregionally came the idea that we also might learn by getting to know another bioregion that had some similarities and some commonalities to our bioregion. So we were very lucky to have some connections in Japan and Mongolia. And I'd like to tell a little bit of the stories from those two places and then have us think together about how they might help us in this bioregion here at home. So in northern Mongolia there is a valley that is about the same size as this valley. It reminds me very much of the Mission Valley in terms of its shape and elevation and the kind of topography, the kind of water, the kind of mountains. Two major differences. One is that the winters are much colder. I was in that valley last year at this time, and the nighttime temperatures were getting pretty close to 0 Fahrenheit routinely at this time of year. So they routinely are minus 40 during the main part of the winter. So they have permafrost. And of course the other difference is the cultural and historical difference. In 1900, Mongolia was under the Chinese influence, and the nomadic peoples were organized in tribes as they have been for centuries. And in 1920-21, Mongolia became the first non-USSR country to become socialist. So history from 1920-21 until 1990, Mongolia was very parallel to the history of USSR. So the country was industrialized. The nomadic herders were encouraged strongly to form productive communes. Many of the people who were herders became factory workers. Many of them became educated in Russia, Czechoslovakia, and other places under Soviet influence. They became highly literate. The literacy rate in 2000 was around 95%. And so these people were partially forced through their own politic, but also through the politic of their big neighbor to the north and the west, to become factory workers, to become educated, essentially to become globalized. And some of my feeling is that all of what we're involved with is simply the process of globalization and the process of the human race getting used to how to use the tools that come from industry. And industrialization that is very mechanical and very linear may not be the best fit for a species that is spontaneous and can be full of emotion and full of all kinds of variables that you can't explain with mathematical equations and you can't handle in a linear engineering sense. So a lot of the gains that were initiated by the start of science beginning in Greece and coming through Descartes and on through the Industrial Revolution, lots of those gains have made really great tools that we can use in technological ways. But we haven't especially developed the cultural and social knowledge of how to use those tools in ways that truly move us towards contentment, happiness, and sustainability. So Mongolian people have gone through the same revolution that we've gone through. And in Mongolia, the democratic revolution started just a few years ago. And so when we go to Mongolia, we find a people who are coming back, in many cases, to their tribal ways. They're rediscovering the importance of family and clan. They're rediscovering the importance of herbal medicines and other traditional approaches to living more of a land-based, nature-centered way of life. They have teenagers with all kinds of modern Western clothes, and everybody has a hat that says N on it, or a pair of pants that says Adidas on it. And they have all of the difficulties of alcohol and a whole set of problems that are social in nature. And again, coming, a lot of them, through this process of industrialization and mechanization. We've had a chance to go with citizens and students to Mongolia the last 5 summers, and we've learned some very important things. The valley that we study has almost no infrastructure, almost no way to generate financial wealth in terms of cash. So when we ask them what some of their difficulties are, they point to lack of roads and bridges and petroleum and vehicles and ways to generate cash beyond selling their animals. When we ask them how things are socially, 10 years ago, they would have said, we're devastated. We've lost all of our jobs in the factories, or we've lost our monthly wages working for the herding collective. Now they're starting to say, we are rediscovering family and clan, and we're rediscovering community festivities and activities that are now being done more spontaneously on our own, instead of having the Soviet government say, this day is the day that you will have a particular celebration. So they are starting to say, wow, we have a really rich social fabric. Even though we don't right now have the money and the industrial production capacity to supply the medical needs of our people, to do the job of educating we'd like to do, to get our animal products to market, to go to the capital city once or twice in our lives. So they still feel they have a lot they would like to gain in the material sense. If we ask them how things are environmentally or ecologically, they say, we have this beautiful valley, we have this land, we have our domestic animals, we can eat from our animals, we can generate a lot of our clothing needs from our animals. We're pretty proud that we still know how to do this, and that if the international economy really changed and Mongolia lost its 85% of its GNP that's generated by donor dollars, we could still survive. It would be tough, but we could still survive. But then they say, well, since privatization, now every family can have as many animals as they want. That family over there, they're really good herders, and they now have 1,000 animals. And another family somewhere else has 1,000 animals, and other families have 100 or 125 animals, which is about the number they think they need per family. So the tool of privatization coming from our side is now resulting in overgrazing and overuse of the grassland resource. So there is a dilemma, a result of the application of a tool somewhat out of context, because the Mongolian culture, as Dan Kemmis maybe implied, is, or someone in the group implied, is very much group oriented. And it's not my horse. Well, it might be my horse if I'm a Mongolian male, but many things are shared. And there's much more of a feeling of our thing. Example is, last year at this time, we were there with Gordon Wiltsey from National Geographic to document the fall migration of herders as they go from the low part of the valley up over a mountain range to either another valley or to a higher part of the valley we work in, to get away from the severe winter inversions, to go to a place where the terrain has more firewood and more grass. And these people face gathering all of their household goods and all of their animals and all their family members and traveling by horse, oxen, and yak and camel for about a week to 10 days worth of travel. And one man had a heart attack or had a stroke and couldn't walk much and wasn't really fit to travel. And so we visited the family and tried to brainstorm with the family, well, this valley has some small towns that are inhabited during the winter, couldn't grandfather stay in town all winter? And they said, no, we will not split the family. One way or another, grandfather's going with us. So that strong family connection is some of that social fabric that we still have some here, but maybe not as much of. So again, those people are finding themselves desperately wanting more ways to have economic productivity, finding a very strong social fabric, but seeing some of the ecological base wither away. So what are some ways that can change? And helping them to document through the creation of a bioregional wealth profile what they value is one way that can be a useful tool to help them start to make decisions that lead towards sustainable pathways. So interviewing some of the citizens and asking them to give a sense of what is most important in their lives, ecologically or environmentally, and what are the conditions of those factors. So they tell us the rivers are very important, and they tell us, well, the rivers are just fine except that there are places where they're eroding because of too much grazing. So that's identification of a symptom that the community might choose to work on. And they tell us socially that we are having some murders because of alcoholism. And that's another symptom that they can now start thinking about how to change. And of course, I mentioned all of the things they would like to do in terms of their infrastructure. So by helping on a local basis as well as within a region, helping local citizens to discover what they have is a very useful first step. And in the process of discovering what they have, they express their personal values. And if a person or a family or a business or a community organization has had a chance to express personal values and also document in a regular and a way that people respect, document where they are environmentally or ecologically, socially, and economically, then they have a much more firm foundation upon which to think about, now what should we do? We have an offer from a Japanese company that would like to bring in Suzuki four-wheel drive vehicles for Japanese tourists. Well, that might solve our perceived economic problems. What else might it do? And so they have a chance to compare what the results of that action might be against their value set. And we feel it's really important that we don't tell them what they should or shouldn't, what we think they should do, but we think this process can be very helpful in helping them to see more clearly where they are and where they want to go in a way that is set and informed by personal and community values, and then by a more clear understanding of what are our ecological resources and what is their condition, what is our social fabric and how is it, what are the ways in which we can make the economic goods and services that we need here to have fulfilling lives. And by asking those questions, an individual person, a family, a community organization can move ahead. And so we have asked those questions there in Mongolia. We've also asked those questions in a community in Japan. Northern Japan, same latitude as here, more precipitation, forested area in central Hokkaido. Hokkaido is Japan's northern island. And interestingly enough, in 1868, the Japanese government changed, and at that point Japan said, let's turn towards the rest of the world, let's industrialize, let's learn from the rest of the world, let's industrialize and become a world power. So starting at that time, basically at that time, the native population, the Ainu of northern Japan, started to receive, not by their own wish, they started to receive visitors from main Japan, and main Japan was trying to populate that island quickly enough so that the Russians wouldn't come in. There was this tension between Japan and Russia. So the Japanese government subsidized citizen farmer soldiers to come from southern Japan and homestead in Hokkaido. And the homesteading largely was based on forestry and then on agriculture from Massachusetts. Because Japan looked to the US and said, what a great farming country, let's bring some experts in American agriculture and they will show us how to do it. So if you travel in Hokkaido, northern Japan today, you'll see farmsteads, barns, silos, looks like Massachusetts. And you'll see very similar farming practices. So today, that island of 5 million people, many of the communities are devastated because the timber industry is like it is here, very inactive, and the agricultural industry is like a lot of agriculture here, dependent on global markets, and many Japanese dairy farmers are failing, many rice farmers are failing. So a lot of the economic base in Hokkaido seems to be withering away. And of course, the reaction in its place is to bring in manufacturing and big-scale technological approaches. But also in some of these communities where the schools are closing, where people my age and older are hanging on and their kids have gone to the city, there is a revival effort. For example, a graduate of this university in animal science from near Tokyo decided to make his home in Hokkaido because he likes to fish. He likes more of a rural life. So he saw emu birds in Churchill, Montana, just right here, and said, oh, there are no emus in Hokkaido. Now he has Hokkaido's first emu farm. And it's not just an emu farm, but the vision that he and his young friends have is to have emu as a centerpiece for a way of life that will attract young people who want to live close to the land in sustainable ways. And so they're finding ways to make money from emu. Their emu feathers can be used for making flies for fishing. Emu oil is very healthy. It goes on and on as an example of a way that some of the people in this small town are, this crazy Japanese guy with long hair, he's making some inroads. And in fact, one of his 3 partners was just elected to the town council because these 3 guys are not just doing their emu business, but they're making an attempt to get out in the community and interact with school kids and teachers and do some positive things. There are many other examples in Hokkaido of creative enterprise going on. If you ask people who live there about their wealth profile, they say medical care costs are too high, we can't get to the hospital, we can't get doctors from the capital city to come out and service us, our incomes are gone because of what has happened with the timber industry and the agricultural industry. So you get many of the same symptoms that we have in Montana. This place also has a mine that is closed. So it's very, very similar. But they say our social fabric, except for lack of goods and services, we still have a pretty strong family life. And we still feel very close to parents and grandparents. Economically, they have less money than they would like, but they have lots more financial resources and infrastructure than Mongolians could ever think of. So it helps the Japanese to understand and see what's going on in Mongolia, to put their situation in perspective, and then to think creatively about how they can really work using the big resources they really do have to move ahead in a sustainable way. So their wealth profile, if you put some numbers on it by interviewing people and doing some of the ecological and social measurements, is different from the Mongolian wealth profile because they are further along in the industrialization and I think globalization process. So if we come here, in the Centennial Valley, which is 150 miles west of here, there are communities that are basically drying up because the ranches which are left are getting larger and employing fewer people. Things are becoming more mechanized. And you have a whole story of American agriculture that we heard yesterday, of so much of the decision making being done in corporate boardrooms by the large companies that are engaged in international trade, and so many instances where the local smaller producers of whatever they're producing are aced out because of decisions that seem to be out of their hands. So if you do again a wealth profile for the greater Yellowstone and include places like the Centennial Valley and places like the booming metropolis of Bozeman, where people love to come and live because of quality of life and universities and airports and ski areas, you get a much different scenario than Mongolia or Japan. People are being attracted to live here because of quality of life aspirations. And many people are able to live here because their monetary wealth has been generated somewhere else. Also, people are becoming more and more transient here. People move to the greater Yellowstone oftentimes for lifestyle reasons and sometimes aren't able to stay. So we have some social things going on here that are quite different from Mongolia and Japan, where things are more long-term and more family-centered, more plant-centered. I'm trying to paint a picture that's doesn't say good or bad, it's just different. If we think about wealth and infrastructure, we're leading the world. We have access to so much more cash, capital, machinery, technology than Mongolia. It's hard to compare. Think about the average yearly income of something like $400 in Mongolia compared to the income that most of us have, and it's just sort of hard to make a comparison. And Japan is in the middle of that, especially rural Japan, where things are not especially rosy economically. Here, another one of the symptoms, of course, is the extreme privatization and the fact that we see more and more homes being built in this valley with gates locked, and there is less chance for individual citizens to go out and travel across the private landscape. On the other side, we have a great wealth of public land right here. And we have more and more individuals and organizations who are becoming aware of the situation and becoming sincerely committed to making positive change. So we brought people from Japan here last summer, and they were very impressed by the number of activist organizations and the concept that individual citizens can make a difference in government, or that a citizen can talk to a state level officer, politician, or even to a senator or representative. So the wealth profile shows a great richness in many aspects of our social system, our governmental system, the financial capital we have available, the landscape that we have available here. And yet we have increasing rates of family kinds of troubles, of personal kinds of troubles, all symptoms of an unease that many of us have. And a lot of that might simply be related to our lack of connection with community, which these other cultures still have more of than we do. So the picture to me is that working with people, starting on a personal basis, a family basis, a community organization basis, and a community basis, can help at all these levels for people to do some simple measures and evaluations of how things are. And ecologically, socially, financially, if we can help people think about working towards a reasonable balance so that we're not focusing just on improving the economy or just on fixing social ills or just on environmental quality, but if we realize that if humans are going to be a part of the ball game, we need to have an interchangeable, fluid balance with all three of those aspects. So by finding a way to measure or understand, evaluate where we are on the basis of ecological, social, and economic, we're building that base upon which we can then think about, well, in the Gallatin Valley, would we like to have some other kind of planning? Are there some tools that would help the sprawl situation or the traffic situation? Are we thinking clearly about different ways to manage bison or elk or wolves, centered now around Yellowstone and wanting to expand to other places? So we can use this as a foundation for planning and decision making. We can also learn from these other places, because even though they are similar, there are some interesting differences that we might want to learn from. So that's what we're doing. And we're basically just started with this process. We haven't clearly found effective ways to do a bioregional wealth profile for a person or a family or a community, but we're working on it. And we have some steps. We've done some interviewing in all three places. We have some numbers that are sort of interesting, but probably yet not valid in a scientifically biased way. But we're started, and that's what we're doing. Fitting in with the concept that understanding more about one's place leads to more connection with community, not only community of animals and plants, but of course the community of people, which I think we all miss. So this conference, Sam, it seems to me, has been a wonderful addition to finding ways that people of all ages and of all interests can start to identify small doable things that can be undertaken. The wealth profile is one tool that may help in some cases, and there are so many other tools out there. So that's I have fun pictures, and sometime we'll have a chance to see those, and sometime you'd be interested in really seeing the photographs of the Mongolian migration. But sometime.
So how do you, in thinking from an environmental perspective, in the greater Missoula Valley, it seems that the bioregion relates very specifically to certain rivers, certain, it's demarked very geographically. And it seems like anyone could look at a number of different things within that geography. And I don't understand, because I'm not familiar with the political systems in Japan or Mongolia that, probably have a big effect on these social systems that you're looking at. I'm only familiar, in other words, with, my own bioregion. But how is it that you choose the particular indicators that you're looking at?
Well, as I interpret your question, it would be that there are so many indicators one could look at. How do you choose a set that are practical and doable and meaningful? And so, if you think about a community of people and the land, you can think of that as a dynamic, evolving, interchangeable system with lots of components. This is another example of a dynamic, interchangeable system. Person. And so we are using the same template of questions in each place. So if we use the idea of systems thinking, first of all, whether it's a person or a bioregion, we function by energy, which mostly, hopefully, comes by way of the sun. So we can ask in all of these bioregions or all of these people, how are you using energy and where does it come from? And they can list sources and talk about costs and efficiencies. So, and also if we're doing the social part, instead of solar energy, which is vital, we're all sitting here right this second because we have some kind of energy of motivation. So that's going to cause us to do whatever we do. So we think ecologically about the sun, we think socially about motivation. Ecologically, we think about water and minerals, earth materials that are used to make our food, to make our clothing. So ecologically, energy and material cycle is very critical. Socially, knowledge cycling is very critical. In Mongolia, we find lots of people who don't have access to news and knowledge, and they feel disenfranchised because of that. So there's a situation that is related partly to infrastructure and partly to the social tradition. Same in Japan. So this system, whether it's a person or a bioregion or a community, functions on solar energy, on cycling of water and mineral materials. And through that process, ecologists say there is succession or change. Social people say those are community dynamics. So you get the whole interchange of activities, relationships between us and other parts of nature. So you can look at this again as a sort of a regular systems way. You can look at it ecologically or socially. You can also look at it economically. Economically, instead of just sun powering things economically, capital is part of that mix. And somewhere in there comes human knowledge and motivation and organization. So we can use that template, and we hope by using the same template, but then encouraging individuals in their own place to come up with the measures or the indicators most meaningful to them, that they have ownership and that they then truly believe in what they are saying is important. Long-winded answer.
Thanks.
In your formula, if I may call it that, does it include the influence of the next level of government? For example, so you know what I'm talking about. The waters that are generated in this state flow out of the boundaries of the state, and therefore there are federal standards that says you cannot degrade that water because people down the river use it. Is this idea part of the concept that you're evaluating? When you think of community, does it include influence from a higher level?
Our process acknowledges the whole situation. So by virtue of that, our process, which is called holistic management, acknowledges a manageable, doable situation for temporary, for right now. So if we're working on a water problem, let's look at the water quality right here, and then let's expand our circle of knowledge as much as is practical for the time to incorporate the larger and larger situation. So very much we feel that this process is acting locally first and then expanding regionally and globally as we can. If we expand globally right now, we'll all melt down because it's so big and complex. So if we select something that is small enough initially for us to work with, and then keep bringing in these new variables and complicating factors, which we must, otherwise we haven't solved. Thanks. Sam.
I really appreciate this kind of holistic sense of place that you work with and how you explain all these values. And I'm just kind of curious, how does it apply? What is your vision personally as a bioregion program for Bozeman or for people like us who come together and can give some people power to a movement? Where do you see that going? Personally, where do you see it? Where are you with that?
What I would like to see is individuals and community organizations learning how to use these tools. And I'd like to see the community organizations then infiltrating into the community at large. And that means eventually that people engaged in government know about and do these things. An example is I've had quite an interchange with Brian Schweitzer about this. I think he's excited by the concepts. So my own personal vision is that there become small groups in the 3 bioregions we're working in that interchange, learn together, and start working on specific projects that make specific differences. And that as that happens, for example, right now we have one community organization in Mongolia in this valley. The valley has 8,000 people in it. And as there's demonstration of the utility and the results of this process helping in the valley, I would want our program to be searching for probably the training grants to expand to another valley, another province. And eventually I'd like to, my big ego says this should be happening in all of Mongolia. And that it could be happening in eventually all of Japan. And so the vision, in my opinion, can be very large. It's maybe a little bit, I don't know what to say, pie in the sky right now in terms of showing demonstratable results.
You talk about your wealth profile, and I can see that you can almost adapt that with what we're doing here, with working with teachers and going right into the grade school system and showing a wealth profile for children and working your way up from there, even to establish some sort of funding and do a wealth profile in the Bozeman Chronicle and get some public feedback and things like that on an active level.
We I think, have a big chance to work with all of the school levels. And not only school levels, but people of all ages, as more and more older people become members of learning groups and sometimes have leisure time and want to do something that is not only positive but also fulfilling and leading to their own contentment. So the potential is enormous, and the Bioneers effort here might be, as we've talked a little bit about, there might be a synergy there. And I think a lot of this is driven by finding and creating positive synergies rather than zero synergies or negative ones. Yes?
What I'm perceiving from your program is that how I could apply it is in that a group that I want to focus on having this group's resources or wealth, having them tell each other what their wealth is, what their resources are, and then what their needs are, and then coming up themselves with a solution. And what you would provide or I would provide would be the process. Is that right? The strategies for...
My sense is exactly that. There are many existing groups now, and the process may be helpful.
So do you have materials?
We have teaching outlines, and we have a process which, close your ears, what's called a holistic management decision support process. And it's called that because we think it'll help us get grants. We're trying to get the right words.
Right.
Another word is adaptive management.
Claudia, sorry. What was the group that we did the study of our local bioregion that's already producing these things?
Northwestern Earth Institute.
Yeah, yeah. We visited, well, no, I heard last summer in Portland, I heard the founders of that organization talk. And I was very impressed that they're very bioregional and great potential.
Yeah, we've taken their courses.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Now, Mongolia is, first of all, it's landlocked. So those people for centuries have been relatively isolated, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And secondly, it's quite sparsely populated. It's got a very small total population, doesn't it?
2 million.
2 million? Okay. And they have, they're a good deal bigger than the state of Montana and the Dakotas combined, as I recall.
Alaska?
Yeah. They're that big, as big as Alaska. Okay. So, for centuries, these people depended on their grazing animals, right? For essentially nearly all of their needs. In that sense, they were a lot like the Great Plains Indians.
Yes.
Except the Great Plains Indians hunted, and these people followed their domestic herds.
They also hunt.
They hunted, but anyway, they were forced into this kind of industrial situation by the Soviet Union, and now that's gone, and they've, I take it, a lot of them have reverted back to the nomadic grazing life. So how do they compare the two? Their industrial years versus their current situation where they can revert back to their centuries-old way of life.
Many people we talk to say, I wish, especially the older people, say, I wish we were back to the collectives. I wish we had that monthly check. I wish we had the training, the other kinds of subsidies of socialism. So many, especially older people, hark back to those days. I think younger people probably have a different view as they start to see some success as individuals. And it's going to be very interesting to see if Mongolia might be a place that still has enough of its cultural tradition and cultural values to make decisions that allow a level of industrialization, mechanization, technology adaptation to provide the basic things but still keep the values set. I don't know.
See, one of the interesting things, it wasn't part of the USSR. They asked for the help. So they never lost their language. They never lost, I mean, they are, you know, all those other places in the USSR lost their language, their music, their culture. This country's got all that still. And plus literacy, which neighboring countries don't have.
But it's really a very unique social situation in the world right now.
Yes.
Mongolia's situation.
Yes. And one that we might learn from in many ways. Well, Dave was going to talk first.
Okay. You made a really healthy point that I want to affirm. You were saying when you're bringing a new technology into a community, first thing you do is to have them look at what they already have in place. And I'm the guy that you counseled on the phone before I went to North Korea, and I appreciate your advice. That's probably the most oppressed place in the world, and I wanted to bring in a lot of new ideas. The few Americans that get in are locked up in a hotel, and they get to go to a 1-hour meeting a day, and they're shuffled back. But I looked at what they were doing. I saw plenty of bad, but I looked at what they're doing right and affirmed it, and enjoyed them, and found pleasure in them, and listened to their ideas. And they trusted me, and I got to see the entire nation for 2 solid weeks. That opens up the door, and you know, I had to counteract my training. A lot of us Americans, particularly in some religious denominations, are trained to see the rest of the world as we're right, you're wrong, we're going to come show you what's wrong, break you down, and start over. And I think that you should stay home if you're going to do that. But I think that your attitude was a lot of part of what made you successful, and it worked for me.
We're not successful yet, but we're making slow progress.
Sounds like you're welcome, and you're enjoying each other.
So true, yeah.
Yeah,
And the friendships, and
right,
that's all been so rich.
right.
Yeah.
How would you compare the situation with the Alaskan natives to the Mongolians, the situation that you described?
My sense is that in Alaska, many issues are very similar to the Mongolian situation, where people are living really caught in between being hunter-gatherers and being technologists. And in some cases, everything technologically becomes a tool. The tool can be used with wisdom or not. If it's not used with wisdom, then usually there are side effects that are hard. So it's very similar.
I think this is really exciting because I think when I hear about your system, whatever it is, first of all, it's systemic thinking. And that says something to me about the personal, people doing what they want. You know, I understand that. But their systems keep us from doing what we want. And that's, I think, what you're talking about in terms of a contentment thing. That sometimes, I guess I'm thinking of that because I'm a therapist. And in my office, I see too often people who have, quotes, everything they want, and they don't know why they're not happy. So I think we have to raise this whole discussion to a systemic level, you know, to do some systems thinking on it, to be able to see the interactions of all these things. And I think what's happened is over the industrialization years, there's been a distillation of life, what I would call the fullness of life, in a highly industrialized society. And what I see this as an expansion, an opening up of all the possibilities, so that we can now take a look at the psychic dimensions, you know, and some of the other social dimensions that have been distilled out as we in the Western, and I mean Western in terms of, you know, since Newton's time, in the Western world of science, have lost so much of the fullness in life that someone in Mongolia really understands, even if they don't have some of the technological advances. So I look on what you're doing as like an expansion or a returning home to the fullness of life, and that's really exciting, I think. The second thing that I noticed that I wanted to comment on was I've done lots of group work with people in terms of satisfaction and contentment and all that kind of, you know, psychological stuff. But what you're including and naming, and I think raising to a real important level on a university level, that's what has me so excited, is because I've always done this in my therapy, and it's exciting what happens, but you're introducing place, a sense of place. I mean, the ecosystem where we are into the equation.